The Quiet Panic. You guys have been blowing up my inbox asking for more apartment horror stories, and trust me, I get it. There's something about being trapped in your own space, the one place that's supposed to feel safe, that just hits different. Well, I finally found a story that's going to make you question every shadow in your room tonight. This happened to my friend Sarah about 6 months ago. She just moved into this studio apartment in downtown Seattle. Nothing fancy, just your typical cramped city living situation. But the rent was cheap, and for a college student working 2 part-time jobs, cheap was all that mattered. The building was old, probably built in the 70s, with those thin walls where you could hear your neighbors sneeze 3 units over. Sarah had been living there for about 2 weeks when she first noticed something was off. It was a Tuesday night, around 11:30. She was sitting on her bed with her laptop, working on some assignment that was due the next morning. You know how it is when you're really focused on something and your peripheral vision kind of goes on autopilot. Well, she caught movement out of the corner of her eye, just a quick shift of darkness near the kitchen area. Yes, She looked up from her screen, scanning the apartment. Everything looked normal. The overhead light was on, casting its usual harsh fluorescent glow across the small space. Her kitchen counter was cluttered with the same mess of takeout containers and textbooks she'd left there earlier, nothing out of place. She shrugged it off and went back to typing, but then it happened again. This time she was sure she saw something move near the bathroom door, like a shadow had detached itself from the wall and slithered across the floor for just a split second. Sarah's heart started beating faster. She put her laptop aside and stood up, walking slowly toward the bathroom. She flicked on the light and peered inside. Empty. Just her toothbrush sitting on the sink counter and a towel hanging on the back of the door. Now here's where it gets interesting. Sarah had always been one of those people who blinks a lot when she's nervous or concentrating. It was this unconscious habit she'd had since childhood. Her mom used to tease her about it, saying she looked like she was sending Morse code messages with her eyelids. And that night, as she stood there in her apartment feeling uneasy, she was blinking more than usual. She walked back to her bed and tried to focus on her assignment again. But every few minutes she'd catch another glimpse of movement, always in her peripheral vision. Always just for a fraction of a second. And here's the weird part that she didn't realize until later. It only seemed to happen when she blinked. The next few days were relatively normal. Sarah convinced herself she'd just been stressed about school and work. Maybe she'd been staring at screens too long and her eyes were playing tricks on her. She even bought some eye drops, thinking maybe her vision was just strained. But deep down, she knew something felt wrong about that apartment. It was Friday night when things escalated. Sarah had invited her friend Jessica over for a movie night. They'd ordered pizza and were halfway through some horror film on Netflix when Jessica suddenly paused the movie and turned to Sarah with this confused look on her face. "Did you see that?" Jessica asked, pointing toward the kitchen. Sarah felt her stomach drop. "See what?" "I swear I just saw something move over there like a shadow or something." Now Sarah knew she wasn't losing her mind. Someone else had seen it too. They both stared at the kitchen area for a long moment, but everything was still. Jessica shrugged and unpaused the movie, but Sarah couldn't focus on the screen anymore. She was too busy watching the corners of her apartment, waiting for the next glimpse of movement. About 20 minutes later, it happened again. This time, both of them saw it. A dark shape seemed to slide along the wall near the front door, moving from left to right before disappearing behind the small coat closet. Jessica grabbed Sarah's arm so hard it left marks. "What the hell was that?" Jessica whispered. They spent the rest of the night with all the lights on, talking in hushed voices about what they'd witnessed. Jessica suggested it might be a mouse casting a large shadow, or maybe headlights from cars outside creating optical illusions through the blinds. But Sarah knew better. She'd been living there for almost 3 weeks now, and she knew the normal patterns of light and shadow in her space. The really disturbing part came when Jessica was getting ready to leave around midnight. She was putting on her jacket by the front door when she suddenly stopped and looked at Sarah with this strange expression. "This is going to sound crazy," Jessica said, "but I think those shadows only move when you blink." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. She'd been thinking the same thing but hadn't wanted to say it out loud because it sounded absolutely insane. How could shadows be connected to her blinking? It didn't make any logical sense. But Jessica was right. Over the next hour, they conducted what they jokingly called their scientific experiment. Sarah would stare at a specific area of the apartment while Jessica watched her eyes. Every time Sarah blinked, Jessica would scan the room for movement. And sure enough, almost every single time Sarah's eyelids closed and opened, there would be a brief shift of darkness somewhere in the apartment. Sometimes it was subtle, like a shadow growing slightly longer or changing shape. Other times it was more dramatic, like a dark mass moving several feet across the wall or floor. But it always happened in that split second when Sarah's eyes were closed. Never when she was staring directly at an area, and never when she kept her eyes completely still. Jessica left that night thoroughly freaked out, and Sarah was left alone with this terrifying realization. Somehow the act of her blinking was triggering movement in the shadows of her apartment. She tried to rationalize it, telling herself it had to be some kind of neurological issue or maybe a side effect of stress and poor sleep. But deep down, she knew this wasn't medical. This was something else entirely. The next morning, Sarah decided to do some research. She spent hours online looking up everything from shadow people to haunted apartments to rare medical conditions that could cause visual hallucinations. Most of what she found was either complete nonsense or didn't match what she was experiencing. But then she stumbled across a forum post that made her blood run cold. A user named Dark Corners 87 had posted about a similar experience in an apartment building in Portland. They described shadows that seemed to move independently, always in peripheral vision and always connected to the observer's blinking patterns. The post was from 3 years ago, and there were dozens of replies from people sharing eerily similar stories. Apartments in old buildings, shadows that moved when they blinked. And in every case, the activity had escalated over time. Sarah's hands were shaking as she scrolled through the responses. People described shadows that started small and subtle but gradually became more aggressive. Some talked about dark figures that would appear in their peripheral vision, growing bolder and more defined with each passing day. Others mentioned feeling like they were being watched constantly, even when they were alone. But the comment that really got to her was from someone called Midnight Watcher. They'd written, "It started with blinking too. Then the shadows began moving when I wasn't looking directly at them. By the end, they were moving even when my eyes were wide open. I had to move out before..." The comment cut off there. Midnight Watcher had never posted again. Sarah slammed her laptop shut and looked around her apartment with fresh eyes. Suddenly, every corner seemed darker, every shadow more menacing. That evening, Sarah made a decision that would haunt her for weeks to come. She positioned herself in the center of her apartment with a notebook and pen, determined to document exactly what was happening. She figured if she could map out the patterns, maybe she could find some kind of logical explanation. She started by drawing a rough sketch of her apartment layout, marking where she'd seen movement in the past. The kitchen area had the most activity, followed by the space near the bathroom door and the front entrance. She noted the time, the lighting conditions, and exactly what she witnessed each time she blinked. By midnight, her notebook was filled with entries. 11:47 p.m. Shadow moved left to right along kitchen wall, lasted approximately 2 seconds. 12:03 a.m. Dark mass appeared near bathroom, seemed to pulse before disappearing. 12:15 a.m. Multiple shadows shifted simultaneously near front door area. The documentation was both reassuring and terrifying. Reassuring because it proved she wasn't imagining things, but terrifying because the activity was clearly increasing. In just 3 hours, she'd recorded over 20 distinct incidents of shadow movement. And they were getting bolder. Around 1 in the morning, something changed. Sarah was sitting cross-legged on her bed, pen poised over her notebook, when she saw something that made her drop the pen entirely. A shadow near her kitchen counter hadn't just moved when she blinked. It had moved while her eyes were wide open, sliding across the wall like oil dripping down glass. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She grabbed her phone and called Jessica, not caring that it was past 1 a.m. "Jess, you need to come back," Sarah whispered into the phone. "It's getting worse." Jessica arrived 20 minutes later, and the moment she walked through the door, both of them saw it. A dark figure, roughly human-shaped, standing in the corner near the kitchen. It wasn't there 1 second, and then it was, as clear as day. They both stared at it, afraid to move or even breathe. The figure didn't move for what felt like an eternity. Then Sarah blinked and it shifted 3 feet to the left. She blinked again and it moved closer to them. Each blink brought it nearer, like some twisted game of red light, green light. "Don't blink," Jessica whispered. "Whatever you do, don't blink." But Sarah couldn't help it. Her eyes were starting to water from the strain, and her natural blinking reflex was fighting against her conscious effort to keep them open. When she finally blinked, the shadow figure lurched forward so dramatically that both girls screamed. That's when Jessica grabbed Sarah's arm and dragged her toward the door. "We're leaving. Right now." They spent the rest of the night at Jessica's place, but Sarah couldn't stop thinking about her apartment. What was happening there while she was gone? Were the shadows still moving without her there to trigger them? The thought that kept her awake was even more disturbing. What if the shadows weren't just responding to her blinking? What if they were learning from it? The next day, Sarah went back to collect some clothes and essentials. She planned to stay at Jessica's for a few days while she figured out what to do. But the moment she opened her apartment door, she knew something had changed. Every shadow in the apartment was wrong. They were too dark, too defined, and they all seemed to be pointing toward the center of the room where she was standing. Even worse, they were moving without her blinking at all now. Subtle movements like they were breathing or pulsing with their own life. Sarah rushed to her dresser and started throwing clothes into a bag. In her peripheral vision, she could see the shadows shifting and growing, reaching toward her like dark fingers. She didn't dare look directly at them, afraid of what she might see if she did. As she was about to leave, she noticed something that made her stomach drop. There on her bed where she'd left her notebook the night before was a message written in what looked like charcoal or ash. The words were shaky and uneven, as if written by something that wasn't used to holding a pen. "We see you when you see us." Sarah ran from that apartment and never went back. She broke her lease, lost her security deposit, and had to crash on friends' couches for 2 months before finding a new place. She never told her landlord why she was leaving, and she never reported what happened to anyone official. Who would believe her? But here's the thing that still keeps her up at night. 3 weeks after she moved out, Sarah ran into her old neighbor from the building. The woman mentioned that the new tenant in Sarah's old apartment had moved out after just 5 days, claiming the place was full of moving shadows. Sarah never found out what happened to that apartment after the second tenant left. Part of her doesn't want to know. But sometimes, late at night in her new place, she catches herself being extra careful about when and how she blinks. Because once you've seen shadows that move with your eyes, you never really feel safe in the dark again. And that's why Sarah asked me to share her story with you guys. She wants people to know that if you ever notice shadows moving when you blink, don't try to document it like she did. Don't investigate it, just leave. Because some things in this world respond to our attention in ways we were never meant to understand. Sweet dreams, everyone.